I thought I was being clever, witty, petty. I wanted to cut him down, just a little. So I called him an appetizer, a pregame, a snack. I didn't expect what came next. I didn't expect him to look me in the eye, smirk, and say your mother thinks otherwise. I didn't just lose the argument, I lost everything. It started over the stupidest thing imaginable. We were in Marcus's bedroom on a Thursday night in late September, and I was already irritated because he'd been checking his phone constantly during what was supposed to be our intimate time together. The whole evening had felt off from the moment I walked through his apartment door. Dinner conversation had been forced and awkward. The movie we'd chosen bored both of us to tears. And when we finally made it to his bedroom, even that felt like we were just going through the motions of what a couple should do. Marcus lay beside me, one arm tucked behind his head, the other scrolling through Instagram like I wasn't even there. The glow from his phone lit up his face as he casually liked bikini pics and gym selfies, all while I lay naked next to him, stewing in silence. We'd been together 8 months, long enough to expect basic respect. Instead, I was treated like a placeholder, a warm body, not a person. The sting of it, mixed with pride and spite, hit hard. I knew how to hurt him. I always did. His insecurities were familiar. His height, the job he hated, his perfect older brother. But that night, I didn't go for subtle. I launched straight at his weakest point. So I said it. I actually said the words that would destroy my entire world in ways I couldn't even imagine at the time. I told him he was more of an appetizer than a main course. I laughed as the words left my mouth, thinking I was being cutting and clever, delivering the kind of devastating one-liner that would shock him out of his phone-induced stupor and force him to pay attention to me. The effect wasn't what I expected at all. Instead of getting angry or defensive, instead of the wounded masculine pride I was banking on, Marcus just stopped scrolling. He set his phone down slowly, deliberately, like he was carefully placing a weapon on a table. Then, he turned to look at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not hurt, not angry, but something colder and infinitely more dangerous. His mouth curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of expression that made my stomach clench with sudden, inexplicable dread. It was the smile of someone who'd just been handed the perfect opportunity for revenge, who'd been waiting for exactly this moment to strike back. Then he said those 6 words that would haunt me for the rest of my life, spoken in a tone so casual and conversational that it took me several seconds to process what he'd actually said. Your mother thinks otherwise. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water thrown over my head. My brain struggled to process what I'd just heard, cycling through disbelief, confusion, and growing horror in the space of a few heartbeats. I tried to laugh it off, told him that was a disgusting thing to say, that he was being gross and immature and trying to deflect from my perfectly valid criticism of his performance. But something in his tone, in the way he was looking at me with that satisfied smirk, made my stomach clench with a dread I couldn't quite name. This wasn't the reaction of someone who'd just made a crude joke to save face. This was something else entirely. Something planned and calculated and devastating. He didn't elaborate on his comment, didn't explain or defend or clarify what he meant. Just smiled that cold, knowing smile and went back to his phone like nothing earth-shattering had just happened. But the seed was planted now, and it started growing immediately into something dark and terrible that would consume everything I thought I knew about my life. I lay there in the dark after he fell asleep, my mind racing through memories I'd never questioned before, details I'd dismissed as innocent or coincidental, suddenly taking on sinister new meanings. My mother had always been flirtatious, always proud of how young she looked for 52, always eager to prove that divorce hadn't diminished her appeal to men. Since ending her 25-year marriage to my father 3 years ago, she'd been enjoying her newfound freedom with a series of younger boyfriends who made family dinners uncomfortable and made me question her judgment. But this was different. This was about Marcus specifically, and the more I thought about it, the more details started clicking into place, like pieces of a horrible puzzle I'd been too naive or trusting to see before. The way my mum had acted during Marcus's last visit to my apartment just 2 weeks ago, asking too many personal questions about his work schedule, his hobbies, his relationship history. The way she'd found excuses to touch his arm while talking, to lean in close when he was explaining something, to linger when he hugged her goodbye. There had been the weekend 2 months ago when she'd said she was visiting her sister in Austin for a girls' trip. But when Aunt Lisa had called the house looking for her, she'd seemed genuinely confused about any planned visit. The new workout routine my mother had started around the same time, suddenly obsessed with yoga classes and personal training sessions that kept her out of the house at odd hours. The expensive lingerie I'd found in her laundry basket last month. Black lace and silk in styles way too young and provocative for a woman her age. Or so I'd thought at the time. Most damning of all was the way she'd been acting secretive about her phone lately, always keeping it face down during our conversations, stepping into other rooms to take calls, getting text messages at strange hours that she'd dismiss as work-related, even though she'd been retired from her teaching job for over a year. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Marcus had just made a crude, inappropriate joke to deflect from my insult, that I was reading sinister meanings into perfectly innocent coincidences and normal behavior. But the doubt was there now, poisoning every memory and interaction, making me question everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. The next morning, Marcus acted completely normal, like nothing had changed between us overnight. He made coffee the way I liked it, with too much cream and an obscene amount of sugar. He kissed me goodbye before leaving for work, his lips soft and familiar against mine. Throughout the day, he sent me funny texts during his lunch break, shared memes that made me laugh despite my lingering unease, even stopped by the store on his way home to pick up the ice cream I'd mentioned craving the night before. For a few hours, I convinced myself I'd imagined the coldness in his voice, the calculation in his smile. This was classic Marcus behavior, steady, reliable, maybe a little predictable but fundamentally decent. He wasn't the type to hold grudges or plot elaborate revenge schemes. He was practical, straightforward, the kind of man who dealt with problems directly rather than through manipulation or psychological warfare. But I couldn't let it go completely. I found myself analyzing every interaction between Marcus and my mother with new scrutiny, looking for signs I might have missed, clues I'd been too trusting or oblivious to notice before. I started paying closer attention to her schedule, her moods, the way she dressed when she knew he might be around, the subtle changes in her behavior that I'd previously attributed to her post-divorce confidence. 3 days later, I was at my mother's house helping her organize her walk-in closet, a weekend project she'd been putting off for months. She was in the master bathroom taking a shower after our morning of sorting through old clothes and shoes, and I was sitting on her bed folding sweaters when her phone buzzed with an incoming text message. The device was lying face up on her nightstand, and the preview was clearly visible on the lock screen. The message was from an unsaved number, just a string of digits I didn't recognize, but the content made my blood freeze in my veins. "Hope you slept well. Same time next week." My hands were shaking as I picked up her phone, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears like thunder. I knew her passcode. She'd never bothered to change it from my childhood birthday, 8 digits that had unlocked her phone for years. Before I could stop myself, before common sense or respect for privacy could intervene, I was scrolling through her messages with that mysterious number. What I found there made my stomach drop to my knees and the room spin around me like I was falling through space. Months and months of conversations with that unsaved contact, messages that started innocent enough but quickly became intimate, explicit, deeply personal in ways that made me feel sick. Arrangements for secret meetings, discussions about discretion and timing, conversations about hotel rooms, and excuses for being away from home. But it was the photos that destroyed me completely. The most recent image in their conversation thread was from just 2 days ago. A shirtless man lying in what looked like a hotel bed, face carefully cropped out of frame, but body clearly, undeniably visible. I knew that chest intimately, those shoulders I'd traced with my fingertips, that stupid tribal tattoo on his left ribs that he'd gotten during a drunken spring break trip in college and always claimed to regret. It was Marcus, my boyfriend of 8 months, the man I'd been considering moving in with, had been sleeping with my mother. And from the timestamps on their messages, from the progression of their conversations, from casual to intimate to explicitly sexual, it had been going on for at least 3 months, maybe longer. I sat there on my mother's bed, staring at that photo until my vision blurred with tears, scrolling through weeks of their exchanges, watching the documentation of my own betrayal play out in real time. Messages about how much they missed each other, complaints about having to pretend to be just friends when I was around, discussions about how guilty they felt, but how they couldn't seem to stop themselves from continuing. There were photos of my mother too, images I never wanted to see, never wanted to know existed. Pictures she'd sent him from her bedroom, from the bathroom, from locations I recognized as places she'd claimed to be doing other things. The woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me about respect and honesty and treating people with dignity, had been documenting her affair with my boyfriend like a teenager with her first crush. The shower was still running when I found the messages from yesterday, a conversation that took place while I was at work, completely oblivious to what was happening in my absence. Marcus had texted about missing her, about wanting to see her again soon. She'd responded with details about her schedule, about when I would be out of town for a work conference next week, about how they could spend more time together without worrying about discovery. My mother came out of the bathroom wrapped in her terry cloth robe, humming some song under her breath, and found me sitting on her bed with her phone in my hands and tears streaming down my face. She took one look at my expression, at the device in my trembling fingers, and I watched all the color drain from her cheeks like someone had opened a valve and let her life force pour out. For several long moments, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with the weight of months of deception and betrayal. Then she sat down beside me on the edge of her bed, her movements careful and deliberate, like she was approaching a wounded animal that might bolt or attack at any sudden motion. Her explanation, when it finally came, was delivered in a voice so calm and matter-of-fact that she might have been discussing the weather or her plans for dinner. She said it had started innocently enough, just friendly conversation and casual flirtation that got out of hand. Marcus had come by one evening about 3 months ago when I was working late at the office, looking for the spare apartment key I'd asked him to pick up so he could water my plants while I was out of town. They'd gotten to talking, she said. One thing had led to another. And before either of them really knew what was happening, they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She described it as a moment of weakness, a mistake that was supposed to be a one-time thing, but somehow kept repeating itself until it became something neither of them seemed able to control or stop. She talked about feeling alive again for the first time since her divorce, about connecting with someone who made her feel young and desirable and appreciated in ways she'd forgotten were possible. She said Marcus understood her in ways that men her own age couldn't, that he made her laugh and feel beautiful and reminded her that she was still a woman with needs and desires that didn't disappear just because she was someone's mother. She tried to make it sound like she was the victim in all of this, like she'd been seduced against her better judgment by a younger man who'd pursued her relentlessly. She said she'd tried to end it several times, attempted to be strong and do the right thing, but Marcus kept telling her how much he cared about her, how beautiful she was, how much he needed what they had together. But I'd seen those text messages. I'd seen the photos she'd sent willingly, eagerly even. I'd read the arrangements they'd made, the lies they'd coordinated, the way she'd actively participated in deceiving me for months while sitting at my dinner table, asking about my relationship and offering advice about love and commitment. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake that had spiraled out of control. This was a calculated betrayal that had been going on under my nose while I lived in blissful ignorance. The worst part was how normal everything had seemed. All those family dinners where Marcus had charmed my mother with stories and compliments. All those times she'd praised him to me as a good catch and a keeper. All those conversations where she'd given me relationship advice while secretly sleeping with the man I was talking about. The sheer audacity of it, the breathtaking level of deception required to maintain such an elaborate lie, left me speechless with rage and disbelief. I left her house that day, knowing I'd lost far more than just a cheating boyfriend. I'd lost my mother too, the woman who was supposed to be my safe harbor in any storm, my biggest supporter and most trusted confidant. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Marcus could have done on his own, because it came from someone who was supposed to love me unconditionally, who was supposed to put my welfare above her own desires. I drove straight to Marcus's apartment complex, my hands shaking with a volatile mixture of rage, humiliation, and heartbreak that made it difficult to steer or focus on the road. I was ready to confront him about what I'd discovered, ready to scream and cry and demand answers and explanations, ready to make him face the devastation he'd caused with his calculated revenge. But when I arrived at his building, his parking spot was empty. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, hoping he'd return, before finally going upstairs and pounding on his door. His roommate answered, looking confused and slightly annoyed at my obvious distress, and told me Marcus had packed a bag that morning and left without saying where he was going or when he'd be back. I tried calling him immediately, but my calls went straight to voicemail. When I tried to text him, the messages showed as delivered but never read. Within an hour, I realized my number had been blocked completely. His social media accounts, which had been public for the entire duration of our relationship, had suddenly gone private, cutting off any avenue I might have had to reach him or even see what he was up to. That's when the full scope of his plan became clear to me. The comment about my mother 3 nights ago, the casual way he'd delivered it like a throwaway line, the timing of his disappearance right as I was discovering the truth, none of it was coincidental. He'd known I would figure it out eventually. He'd wanted me to find those messages, wanted me to confront my mother, wanted me to experience the full devastating impact of what they'd done together. This had been revenge, pure and simple. Perfectly calculated payback for my cruel comment about his adequacy as a lover. I'd tried to emasculate him, to reduce him to something small and insignificant and unsatisfying. So he'd responded by proving his desirability in the most psychologically devastating way possible. By seducing the woman who'd raised me, who was supposed to love and protect me above all others, who represented everything sacred and untouchable in my world. The news started spreading through our extended family before I'd even processed what was happening myself. Somehow, word of the confrontation with my mother had gotten out, probably through my cousin who lived next door, and had heard raised voices through the thin walls. Within hours of leaving my mother's house, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls and messages from relatives who'd heard various versions of the story. My cousin Jessica called first, her voice breathless with shock and barely concealed excitement at being the first to get the real story. She asked if it was actually true that Marcus had been cheating on me, and specifically if the other woman was really my own mother. When I confirmed her worst suspicions, she gasped so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. My Aunt Sarah texted to say she was praying for our family during this difficult time, but I could read the judgment between the lines. She'd never approved of my mother's post-divorce lifestyle, and this scandal was just confirmation of everything she'd suspected about her younger sister's moral character. Even my father called, which was remarkable since we'd barely spoken since my parents' divorce 3 years ago. He was awkward and uncomfortable, clearly out of his depth dealing with this kind of family drama, but he offered to let me stay at his place if I needed somewhere to go while everything got sorted out. But the worst reactions came from people who thought the whole situation was somehow funny or impressive. My younger brother actually laughed when I told him what had happened, said he had to admire Marcus's style, even if he disapproved of the method. Several of my male cousins made similar comments about Marcus's strategic brilliance, like this was some kind of chess match he'd won, rather than a devastating betrayal that had destroyed multiple relationships. My mother's best friend, Linda, had the audacity to suggest that maybe, if I'd been more attentive to my relationship, if I'd made more effort to keep Marcus satisfied and engaged, other women wouldn't have been able to move in on my territory so easily. She actually implied that this was partially my fault for not recognizing the warning signs or working harder to prevent it. The story spread beyond our immediate family faster than I could have imagined possible. Dallas might be a big city, but our social circles were smaller and more interconnected than I'd realized. Marcus worked in insurance, an industry where everyone seemed to know everyone else. And apparently, the story of his ultimate comeback to a critical girlfriend was too juicy not to share. I started getting strange looks at the grocery store from people I didn't recognize. A coworker mentioned that her boyfriend had heard the funniest story about a girl who'd insulted her boyfriend and ended up getting the perfect revenge served back to her. The details kept getting more exaggerated with each telling. Some versions had me walking in on them together, others had Marcus announcing the affair publicly at a restaurant. But the core humiliation remained consistent. My boss called me into her office after someone from our client services department asked if I was the girl from that crazy family drama everyone was talking about. I had to sit through a mortifying conversation about maintaining professional boundaries and considering how personal choices might reflect on the company's reputation, even though I was the victim in the situation. Marcus himself remained completely silent through all of this chaos. He didn't gloat publicly or tell his side of the story on social media or try to defend his actions to mutual friends. He didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves, and everyone could see exactly how expertly he'd turned the tables on me. I'd tried to humiliate him in private with a cruel comment about his sexual performance, so he'd humiliated me in the most public and devastating way possible by proving that performance wasn't an issue with someone who mattered to me. The relationship between my mother and me never recovered from that day. She continued seeing Marcus for several more weeks after our confrontation, even after I begged her to end it, even after I explained in graphic detail how much her choice was hurting me and destroying what remained of our family. She said she was finally happy for the first time since her divorce, that she deserved to pursue her own pleasure and fulfillment without worrying about everyone else's opinions or judgment. I'd called him an appetizer, thinking I was being clever and cutting, delivering the kind of memorable insult that would put him in his place and make me feel powerful. He'd responded by proving he was substantial enough to satisfy my own mother's hunger, and in doing so, he'd destroyed everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me and my place in their lives. The insult I'd thrown had boomeranged back with devastating precision, and I was the only casualty in a war I'd started but had no idea how to fight. Some lessons cost everything you have, and some words can't ever be taken back, no matter how much you wish you'd never said them in the first place. I don't throw insults anymore. I've learned exactly how they taste when they come back colder, sharper, and perfectly aimed at your weakest spot. I called him an appetizer, a warm-up, a joke, something insufficient and forgettable. He slept with my mother and ended the meal entirely. The appetite for cruelty dies quickly when you discover how expertly it can be fed back to you.